There are these moments in history, these profound and just utterly frustrating historical gaps where a whole community of vibrant, thriving civilization really simply vanishes.
Exactly. No smoke, no fire, no last stand, just silence.
And those are the stories that I think have the most power because they really challenge our basic assumptions about how societies work or how they fail.
Well, we operate on the assumption that societies collapse through, war or disease or some big natural disaster. And when they do, they leave evidence of that struggle. They leave a mark.
But what happens when the historical record just goes quiet? Both the written record and, the physical evidence on the ground.
That is the core of what we're exploring in this deep dive. We're talking about silence on a massive, perfectly coordinated scale.
We are opening the file on Kuldhara, which has become one of India's most enduring and, I think, most misunderstood mysteries.
That's a really good point, the misunderstanding, because for too long, this story has been incorrectly placed, which gives it the wrong flavor entirely.
Right. People hear India mystery and might picture something high in the mountains. But Kuldhara is not in the Himalayas. It's a ghost town built against the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Thar Desert.
Near Jaisalmer in Rajasthan. And that geographical correction is absolutely critical.
Why so critical?
Because it defines the puzzle we're here to solve for you. How could an entire, wealthy, established community, the Paliwal Brahmins, disappear overnight in the early 1800s from the middle of a desert?
An environment where you can't really hide.
Precisely. They left no trace of violence, no clear sign of where they went, and certainly no official record of departure that the authorities, the very people who were supposedly their oppressors, could follow.
So our goal for you, the learner, is simple. We're going to spend the time needed to unpack the few very specific facts we have about this vanishing act. We'll get into the extreme difficulty of its logistics.
And then we'll analyze the competing theories. And they really do range from cold, hard political pressure and economic tyranny all the way to dark, defiant folklore.
And by the end, we'll try to determine what truly makes this story so unsettling, even 2 centuries later.
We're really trying to go beyond the spooky ghost town surface here and ask a deeper question.
Which is?
What kind of social or political system forces hundreds of people to choose eradication from the map over staying in their comfortable, purpose-built homes? And what does it say about the organization of a community that they could pull off this kind of flawless escape?
In the middle of a desert, no less.
Exactly.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? What kind of pressure makes abandoning stability, wealth, and generations of investment the only option? It requires a level of coordinated desperation we so rarely see in history. Let's really unpack this mystery.
Okay, let's start at the beginning.
To really understand the shock of this disappearance, I think we first have to fully appreciate what Kuldhara was before it went silent.
Yes. This wasn't some transient camp or a small, struggling settlement barely clinging to existence. This place was a center of desert prosperity.
So let's establish that setting. You said the desert context is everything.
It is. Kuldhara is located in the hot, arid, and back then politically complex region of Rajasthan, right in the heart of the Thar Desert. And this isn't just a scenic backdrop. This environment profoundly impacted every single aspect of their society.
From their engineering to their wealth.
Everything. If you're going to build a civilization in the Thar Desert, you are dealing with just extreme heat, sandstorms, and above all, a critical scarcity of water.
The sheer effort required to build a permanent, thriving village in that kind of environment. It just speaks volumes about their commitment to the location.
And their mastery of it. That geographical choice tells us immediately that these people were not just resilient, they were masters of resource management. Survival in the desert hinges on 2 things: controlled access to water and control over trade routes.
And the desert also makes their disappearance even more perplexing, doesn't it?
It makes it almost impossible. You'd assume any large group moving out of that sparse, exposed area would be incredibly vulnerable to detection. You can't just melt away into the sand.
So who are these desert masters? The inhabitants are specifically identified as the Paliwal Brahmins. Now, for our listener, just hearing Brahmins might only tell part of the story.
Right. Their identity is absolutely crucial, and we need to clarify what that status meant in 19th century Rajasthan. They were not just a religious or scholarly caste in this context.
They were something more specialized.
Much more. The Paliwal Brahmins were a highly respected and incredibly influential community of agriculturalists and financiers. They were innovators. They essentially engineered prosperity in a barren land.
So tell us more about that. How did they generate the wealth needed to build a permanent town in the middle of nowhere?
Well, they were renowned for their ingenuity, particularly in agriculture. They pioneered water harvesting techniques that were centuries ahead of their time, which allowed them to cultivate crops even during long dry spells.
And beyond farming.
They were also very astute traders and moneylenders. They occupied a similar social and economic level as the great merchant classes of the region. They leveraged their stability and organization to control key trade routes, probably dealing in things like wool, salt, maybe livestock.
And providing essential finance to local rulers.
Exactly. So we are not talking about a flight of poor, easily displaced farmers.
Not at all. We're talking about the financiers, the administrators, the intellectual class of that immediate region. These were people with substantial political and economic connections. Their stability should have been, for all intents and purposes, assured.
Indeed. Their status reinforces this idea that whatever forced them out had to be an existential threat that just completely overrode their formidable social and economic standing.
To threaten a community this wealthy and connected is to risk destabilizing the entire regional economy.
It's a huge risk for the ruler. They were a proper, established, and critically, a thriving community that had accumulated generational wealth. They had everything to lose.
And the physical evidence of that success is just stunning, especially when you see it against the backdrop of the desert. When you look at the ruins of Kuldhara today, you see permanence, you see investment built to last centuries.
The physical ruins, they just speak to a phenomenal investment in that place.
Yeah.
The homes are not temporary shelters. The source notes, they were built with locally sourced stone.
Which in the desert is a big deal.
A huge deal. Stone construction offers superior insulation against the brutal, fluctuating temperatures, and it provides protection against the relentless desert winds and sand. Building with stone is expensive. It requires substantial labor and generational foresight. It signifies permanence.
But the real insight into their sophistication comes from how they managed the most critical resource of all, water. This wasn't just a cluster of sturdy homes. It was an organized society designed to conquer the desert.
And that detail in the source about the advanced infrastructure, specifically the proper drainage systems, is arguably the most important feature of Kuldhara.
Because in the Thar Desert, water is life.
Water is everything. And the systems they developed weren't for sanitation alone. They were primarily for rainwater harvesting.
Okay, so how did these systems actually function in a desert? And what does that tell us about their engineering capabilities?
Well, historical analyses suggest these systems included these elaborate arrangements of channels and covered runoff paths. They were designed to collect every single drop of monsoon rain and funnel it into underground reservoirs, or kunds, as they're called.
So they weren't just managing waste.
No, they were conserving, storing, and rationing water with a high level of civil engineering. This requires a strong central administration, collective agreement, and advanced, mathematical or hydrological knowledge.
This level of organization and engineering knowledge was certainly superior to typical settlements of the era, which mostly just relied on shallow wells.
Oh, far superior. So they were organized enough to solve these complex public health, civil engineering, and strategic survival problems posed by the desert. They managed water, managed waste, and crucially, they managed trade well enough to maintain this flourishing community for generations in one of the world's most difficult environments.
So a thriving community in this context implies these sophisticated trade networks, extremely stable resource management, that allowed them to weather droughts.
And a robust internal societal structure capable of complex coordination. Their past stability and clear ability to survive the desert only deepens the shock of their disappearance. This wasn't a community that failed due to environmental collapse or, internal fighting.
It paints a picture of a successful, functional mini-society, a jewel in the sand built for the long haul.
And this highly functional village was apparently functioning right up until the very last minute. This wasn't a slow decline over decades of drought or dwindling fortunes.
No, this was an abrupt, surgical, historical cutoff.
Which forces us to confront the suddenness of the event. And now we have to turn to the logistics of the exodus itself.
Right, so we've established that Kuldhara was a robust, community, wealthy, organized, settled. Now we come to the event itself. The night history just stopped.
We can pinpoint the timing, generally, to sometime in the early 1800s. And as we mentioned, this places it during a period of shifting power dynamics in Rajasthan, where local ministers and emerging authorities were vying for control, often through aggressive taxation.
But the historical backdrop is almost secondary to the unbelievable way they left.
It is. The core narrative suggests the entire village went to sleep like any other night. That detail is haunting, isn't it?
It is. If this were a disaster, there would be panic. If this were a slow decline, you'd see staggered departures over time. This implies that whatever caused the exodus was either instantaneous.
Or, and this is perhaps more chilling, the decision had already been made, coordinated, and finalized, but kept absolutely secret until the precise moment of execution.
So if the threat was external and immediate, the decision to leave had to be incredibly swift. It suggests some intolerable pressure point had been reached.
But if the decision was internal, a collective resolution forged over weeks or even months of secret meetings, it speaks to an extraordinary, almost incomprehensible level of discipline and shared resolve among hundreds of people. They had to all agree on a single, unified plan.
And the success of that plan is right there in the forensic details, or really the complete lack of them. This is what elevates the story from a simple migration to a deep, unnerving mystery. What evidence of normal life was just left in place?
Well, we have to analyze the physical evidence that survived. When archaeologists study an abandoned site, they look for signs of a rushed evacuation, dropped valuables, partially packed items, signs of a fight.
Kuldhara has none of that.
None. It is the perfect absence of evidence. The reports note that the homes were left intact. This is critical. It rules out any immediate large-scale physical destruction like an earthquake or a major fire. The structures were perfectly sound.
Which means they weren't forced out by physical destruction. They voluntarily abandoned structurally sound housing, which, given the expense and labor of stone construction, represents an enormous calculated financial sacrifice.
They left behind their most durable, most valuable assets.
But the detail that truly sticks with me, the human layer to this, is the small, intimate evidence. The utensils were left untouched, not just furniture, but everyday kitchenware.
That's profoundly significant. Utensils were the essential everyday items of a 19th century household. They were necessary for food preparation, for communal dining. They represent the continuity of daily life.
They weren't high-value trade goods, but you'd need them to survive on the road.
Exactly. And leaving them untouched suggests two possible and equally striking psychological scenarios. I find them both compelling.
Okay, let's explore scenario one.
Extreme urgency. The departure was so fast, so sudden, that they prioritized only the barest travel necessities: water, which is critical in the desert, maybe some grain, and little else over their household goods. They moved with a speed that just precluded packing anything but the essentials for immediate flight.
And scenario two.
This one speaks more to defiance. They departed with the absolute certainty that they would never return. Or, even more chillingly, that the possessions they left behind should symbolize their curse on the place.
So if they had planned to ever come back, they would have at least buried valuable items.
Surely. But the untouched utensils speak to an immediate, permanent, irreversible break. They essentially weaponize their own absence.
And crucially, this silence is compounded by the lack of any grim evidence. No signs of violence, no broken defensive walls, no scattered weapons.
Which immediately eliminates a mass attack or conquest by an external force. This wasn't a massacre, it was a mass evacuation.
If it had been a conflict, we would expect signs of a struggle. Damage to the homes, at the very least.
Or remnants of bodies. The complete absence of mortal remains means they all successfully fled as a unified group, and they did so without leaving behind their dead.
Which brings us to the biggest logistical puzzle of all, especially in the desert: the missing witnesses.
This is the part that just strains credibility and demands our attention. No one ever saw them leave.
Think about the logistics. An entire village of Paleol Brahmins. Some sources estimate close to 1,500 people.
How does that many individuals, moving with children, the elderly, and whatever supplies they could carry, move silently in the middle of the night without attracting any attention?
A night departure suggests they used the cover of darkness, but a desert night can be surprisingly bright. The starlight is intense, and the ground is often sand or sparse, dry earth, so quiet movement is extremely difficult.
If they walked, they left tracks. If they used livestock, they made noise, yet they disappeared into the vast emptiness. This implies a sophisticated, almost military level of organization and execution. They didn't just walk away, they managed to erase their trail completely.
And they had to avoid detection from neighboring villages who would have been suspicious, and also from the minister's own patrols.
It's an incredible feat.
I have to pause here and just offer a skeptical counterargument. Is it possible that the historical account is exaggerating the suddenness? Maybe they left in staggered groups over a few months, and the whole one-night escape is just dramatic folklore that built up over time.
That's a very good question, and one we have to consider. But the physical evidence seems to contradict a staggered departure.
How so?
If they left over months, families would have packed systematically. They would have removed valuable items, tools, and yes, the utensils, the things you need to start a new life. The current state of the ruins, where everything is left in this state of suspended animation, strongly suggests a collective, simultaneous evacuation.
Because if one family left, others would have started cannibalizing the empty homes for materials.
Exactly. The fact that the entire town is preserved points to a unified decision executed all at once. They successfully weaponized silence, unity, and the vastness of the desert against their oppressors.
And that level of coordination requires a motive powerful enough to justify this impossible logistical feat.
Which brings us to the theories.
The facts are sparse but dramatic. A wealthy, sophisticated community, impeccable organization, and a silent, irreversible exodus in the early 1800s. Now we move into the realm of theory, starting with the most rational, the socioeconomic and political pressures.
The sources all seem to converge on a complex external political environment. And the first theory centers on the heavy hand of governance, specifically involving a powerful minister who oversaw that region, probably serving the Maharaja of Jaisalmer.
This political pressure theory is highly credible for that era, isn't it? Especially in regions where local leaders had almost total autonomy.
Absolutely. And the immediate motive detailed is crushing taxes. The idea that economic oppression forced the people to flee, choosing flight over complete financial ruin.
We have to connect this to the bigger picture of 19th century Rajasthan. A powerful minister would have wielded near absolute power within his domain, particularly over economic assets.
And for a thriving community like Kuldhara, which was a hub of finance and trade, they represented a significant, easily exploited source of revenue. In a way, they were too successful, which made them a prime target.
Let's elaborate on what crushing taxes actually means in this context. We're not just talking about a higher income tax, right?
Oh no. These levies would likely have included exorbitant land revenue demands, tariffs on their trade goods, and perhaps even forced loans or confiscatory fines.
So crushing taxes was, by definition, an act of political warfare.
It was. They weren't just high, they were designed to extract wealth until nothing remained, fundamentally threatening the community's capital and its ability to sustain itself.
For a wealthy Brahmin community with deep ancestral roots, facing that kind of economic eradication would certainly be an existential threat, justifying a mass exodus.
They would have understood that once their wealth was gone, their social standing and their power would vanish too.
The flight, therefore, becomes a calculated strategic form of resistance. If the state tries to confiscate your wealth, the ultimate refusal is to deny the state the opportunity to collect anything.
By taking your labor, your capital, and your future somewhere else, they chose non-cooperation over submission. And think about the lasting financial hit for that minister.
He lost his biggest source of tax revenue overnight.
Not just for that year, but for all future years. He lost the entire tax base of a highly productive community. This wasn't just an evacuation. It was an economic scorched earth policy directed against the oppressor. It was the ultimate non-violent refusal to pay.
So while the minister got his empty town, he lost the sustainable source of wealth he was trying to seize.
Exactly. And that leads us directly to theory 2, which often overlaps with the first. The political conflict centered on a rejected demand.
This adds a more personalized, moral, and maybe immediate layer to the conflict. It suggests a specific flashpoint.
Right. A powerful minister used to absolute obedience made a demand that the Paliwal Brahmins collectively and unanimously refused.
The source doesn't specify the nature of this demand. But based on historical conflicts from that time, we can speculate, can't we? What kind of demand would compel an entire village to abandon everything?
It had to be something that violated the very core of their social or religious integrity, something non-negotiable.
Like what?
It could have been related to surrendering land, forced conscription, or, according to some of the more enduring local tales, a deeply offensive personal demand.
Such as the minister seeking the forced marriage of a respected village member.
Yes, perhaps the daughter of the village chief. That type of personal violation, leveraging raw power against social dignity, would have been met with staunch, unified resistance, especially by a community that prided itself on its Brahmin status and integrity.
To comply would have meant not just political subjugation, but moral degradation.
And it makes perfect sense to connect theories 1 and 2 as cause and effect. The minister may have issued the demand, personal or political, and when that was denied, he retaliated by implementing the crushing taxes.
So the two acts accelerated the timeline.
Right. The minister wasn't just seeking money, he was seeking total submission. When that was denied, He used financial ruin as his final weapon, forcing them to choose between economic extinction and flight.
The synthesis of these socioeconomic theories gives us a rational, logical, albeit dramatically executed explanation for the flight. The community chose collective resistance through disappearance.
This act of abandoning everything to deny the oppressor is one of the most profound political statements you can make without any violence at all.
And for the listener, this offers a sobering real-world application. This shows how unchecked governmental overreach and unsustainable financial pressure, when taken to the extreme, can literally dismantle stable, sophisticated societies.
Leaving nothing but ruins behind as a testament to that oppression.
Okay, so we've established the rational political motivation for the flight, but as you mentioned earlier, the logical explanations only cover why they left.
Right. They don't fully explain why no one ever returned or why the village remains untouched 200 years later. The ruins are intact, the utensils are there, and no one dares to settle.
For that, the rational gives way to the ritual.
Exactly. We shift now to Theory 3, the enduring shadow, the folkloric explanation. A curse placed on the land before departure.
This is the dramatic climax, the final act of defiance. The idea is that the Paliwal Brahmins, having been forced out, did not just leave under cover of darkness, they consecrated their fury.
They actively ensured that no one, not the minister, not his allies, not even future generations, could ever prosperously settle or rebuild there again.
The psychological depth of this is incredible. Why would they curse the very land they had loved and engineered their prosperity on?
It's an act of profound protective anger. It speaks to their desperation and fury being transformed into a permanent defense mechanism. It transforms their abandonment into this symbolic act of finality against the system that failed them.
If they could not possess the land, no one could truly live there.
The curse became their psychological deterrent, and it was maintained across generations by the minister's own failure to re-inhabit the valuable town site.
Let's analyze the function of the curse itself, though. It's not necessarily a literal magical spell, is it? It's a brilliant piece of socio-political manipulation.
I think that's exactly what it is. The Paliwal Brahmins, having high Brahmin status, possessed immense spiritual authority. By collectively declaring the land cursed and uninhabitable, they leveraged their religious and social standing to make the site toxic to potential usurpers.
It effectively weaponized the fear and superstition that was so prevalent in 19th century society. They made the land politically and socially unusable for anyone else. They rendered their valuable stone houses and advanced water systems worthless to their enemy simply by speaking a decree.
And what's also fascinating is how that fear has endured. For 200 years, people have avoided resettlement there. It suggests the curse was so potent, or the history of the minister's greed so severe, that people simply chose to believe the ghost story rather than attempt to reclaim this oasis in the desert.
Okay, so let's unpack this distinction one last time. Does the curse explain the disappearance itself, or does it explain the permanence of the abandonment?
I think it's definitively the latter. The threat of crushing taxes and the rejected demand explain the necessity of the flight. The curse explains the lasting silence and why Kuldhara remains a perfectly preserved historical relic.
It's the final dramatic flourish of their history.
Exactly. It ensures that their resistance endures in perpetuity through fear and superstition long after the original political context has faded. The curse is the memory preservation system of the oppressed.
So whether you view the vanishing through the lens of cold economic calculus or through the heat of cultural defiance, the end result is the same. Kuldhara remains silent.
And waiting.
We've traced this incredible history of Kuldhara, from its thriving beginnings in the harsh Thar Desert, through the impossible logistics of its silent disappearance, and into these competing theories of oppression and defiance. But what profound meaning does Kuldhara hold for us today?
Well, today, Kuldhara is a village of intact, silent stone houses waiting in ruins. It is, as we noted, a preserved moment in time. But what gives it its lasting power is that dichotomy. It's too intact to be a natural ruin, and it's too abandoned to be a normal village.
And that preserved absence is the heart of the ongoing mystery. The physical evidence, the stone houses, the drainage systems, the untouched utensils, it all points unequivocally to a highly successful, coordinated flight.
But the enduring silence and the lack of resettlement points just as strongly to the power of the curse, or at least the power of collective cultural memory and the fear that the curse instilled.
It's the combination that is so compelling, isn't it? Most historical ruins, they require historians to reconstruct the tragedy. Who fought whom, what broke down, what burned.
Kuldhara feels different. It feels like a photograph taken just moments after the Paliwal Brahmins closed their doors and walked away. The physical reality supports the narrative of a sudden, coordinated flight, a flawless logistical triumph over the desert.
And this brings us to the deeper reflection point noted in the source material, a philosophical and historical observation that I find genuinely unsettling. The observation states, "What frightens us is not the disappearance, but how easily history moves on."
This raises such an important question for us today, especially for those of us trying to learn from the past. Kuldhara is famous because the evidence was left so dramatically preserved in the stone and sand. But how many other silent exoduses are overlooked in history?
How many communities collapsed under duress, financial, political, environmental, and just melted into the historical background without leaving behind a photogenic ruin?
Kuldhara is a stark, preserved reminder that history is not just about grand battles and signed treaties. It is also about the silent, irreversible collapse of stable, sophisticated communities under overwhelming duress.
The history of the Paliwal Brahmins of Kuldhara simply stopped. It stopped at the moment they decided that collective flight was their only option for survival and dignity.
And think about the loss, the complete eradication of their communal identity at that location. While the individuals may have survived and assimilated elsewhere, the immense reservoir of their specialized knowledge, their trade networks, their intricate water harvesting techniques, their customs, that entire collective culture was erased in that one night.
So, what does this all mean for the learner? We've explored a historical enigma driven by a highly complex scenario, a likely combination of political pressure from a greedy minister,
And a powerful cultural defiance expressed through the creation of a lasting curse.
the ultimate piece of knowledge gained is not the definitive answer to where they went, because that's a historical mystery we may never solve.
But the knowledge is the recognition that sometimes collective action and absolute silence can be the most powerful, irreversible force against oppression. The Paliwal Brahmins chose dignity, secrecy, and cultural preservation over submission and visibility.
They chose to become a permanent historical question mark, rather than a footnote in the minister's ledger. They ensured that Kuldhara would be known not as the place that was conquered, but as the place that simply refused to exist under tyranny.
And in doing so, they created a monument to the power of collective decision-making, where the sacrifice of one's past comfort guarantees the survival of the group's future, even if that future is lived anonymously somewhere else.
They refused to give their oppressors the satisfaction of destruction.
They gifted them only an unnerving silence.
So, to summarize this extensive deep dive, we have examined the unique, traumatic facts of Kuldhara, a community of prosperous Paliwal Brahmins living with advanced sophistication in the challenging Thar Desert, who executed a flawless overnight vanishing in the early 1800s.
They left behind intact stone houses, untouched utensils, and absolutely no evidence of violence or struggle. They left behind only the enduring folklore about a powerful curse ensuring the land could never be successfully resettled.
The most likely explanation is a desperate but calculated, collective political maneuver in the face of intolerable governmental demands. The result is one of the most perfectly preserved ghost towns in the world, a powerful, silent monument to communal defiance.
The stories of Kuldhara don't end when the sun sets over the empty town. They simply wait, waiting in ruins, waiting in silence.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over. If you faced impossible political or financial pressure that threatened the very survival and identity of your community, would you choose the path of Kuldhara? To fight publicly, risk annihilation and perish with visibility, or to vanish collectively, abandon everything, and endure anonymously? The deep dive ends, but the echo of that choice carries to the desert air.